just maybe starting with Dan and then going down, would you guys share your name, what you do, and how you are making an impact through what you do on the community? And it's great that I started with you, because that's a little bit weird.
It is great. Thanks. I shouldn't have sat next to you. That's awesome. My name is Daniel Walker. We've been in town for, my wife and I and daughter have been in town for about maybe 20 months now. I am working on a doctorate in urban ministry leadership at North Park Theological in Chicago. And the way that I am involved in the community is what I call community pastor. I'm basically living out my pastoral ministry in the community, and I'll maybe have a chance to share more about what that looks like a little bit later on.
Good morning. My name is Andrew Sprock, and I work with Circles of Grant County. Circles has been around for 4 or 5 years, and we work to connect families with the relationships and the resources that they need to overcome the challenges of poverty. So a lot of what we're doing is continuing to build relationships that are aimed at addressing some of those challenges.
Good morning. My name is Kathy Weatherspoon. I'm the Executive Director of Thriving Families, Thriving Grant County. My family and I have lived in Grant County for 23 years. My impact was first through Kids Hope. I was the first director of Kids Hope USA in the state of Indiana, and we started right here in Grant County. And currently, through Thriving, my ambition is to ask community members to get involved through a collective impact model where we're wanting to come under a common agenda to eradicate poverty in Grant County.
Hi, I'm Joanna Witzig. I'm a teacher at Kinwell Academy. We're an alternative high school here in Marion, seeking to kind of collect students who are on the verge of dropping out or being expelled from high school so that they can work with us to get their diploma. So this is my 5th year doing that, but I think we've been around for probably 7 or 8 years. So we're on the north side of Marion and are very blessed to partner with College Wesleyan Church.
My name is Victoria Marion, and I work for the Grant County Economic Growth Council, and our mission is to facilitate investment and reinvestment for job and creation in Grant County.
Oh, here you go.
Thanks.
I don't know if it'll go all the way over. Chip is coming up to address the technical difficulties.
Do I need to repeat all that? Okay. My name is Victoria Herring, and I work for the Grant County Economic Growth Council, and our mission is to facilitate investment and reinvestment for job creation and retention in Grant County. And obviously, having a job affects people in a lot of financial ways, but also it gives people a sense of pride and ownership in the community.
My name is Jeff Hahn. I am Executive Director of Boys and Girls Club in Marion. Impact. Youth, anything to do with the kids, to empower, to show them how to be young adults, young men, young women, how to be productive members of our society. So that's my goal, that's my mission. Thank you.
Well, thanks, guys. We're going to start light and then maybe go a little bit deeper as we kind of have this time this morning. But as you think about Marion, and I gave you guys this question beforehand, so I'm hoping you gave it some thought. What is the one thing that not everybody in the audience might know about Marion that they should know? And maybe we'll start with Jeff on that one and then work our way back on this one. The one thing that everybody should know.
About Marion?
About Marion.
Giants fight, never die.
Yeah.
I think the one thing that everybody doesn't know and should know about Marion is that there's a lot of products that come out of here. Every single Quaker Oats lid is manufactured in Marion, Indiana. Atlas Foundry makes stadium seats for lots of professional and college stadiums across the country. Cafe Valley makes all the croissants that you get from Burger King and all the cakes that you would get from KFC. And there's just like more on and on and on. Agricor makes all the cornmeal for Jiffy corn muffin mix. Those are just a few.
Let's see. Could we come back to me?
Sure
Is that all
can.
right?
Okay. I'm fascinated with the history of Samuel Plato. He lived in Marion. He's an African American, born in the early 1900s, and he lived in Marion for 19 years. And this was during the time where there was a great prejudice through the Ku Klux Klan. And he was accepted here in Marion and built the Hostess House. He built over 38 post offices around the country. He built Swallow Robbins, which is a dormitory at Taylor, and some apartments in Marion. And I just find that so fascinating. And, you know, it just tells us that we do breed unity in Marion. And it is something that we need to celebrate more.
One of the things that I have been really impressed by is some of the work of our recovery courts and our drug court and family recovery court, and the work that they do with families that are addressing addiction and those kind of things in their life. But the stories that come out of that are really moving, because many of us face obstacles, and there are different degrees to those kinds of things. But some of the folks that are working hard and are being supported by really a great team of people to try to progress and try to overcome some of the challenges in life is really inspiring. And it really is the kind of thing where you can be in awe at the ways in which people can, with support of others, can be resilient in the face of some tremendous obstacles.
I see some of you who have been at the Robert and Kirsten Priest's presentation over the last few months, but that, I think, is one of the things that is really exciting to me. Their research that has uncovered or clearly displayed the history in Marion and Grant County of the Underground Railroad. Some estimates of 1,500 or more slaves were shuttled through Marion in our past. And then also Weaver and the Free Black Settlements. We have such a strong history. The numbers that the priests came up with, almost 3,600 acres were owned by free black slaves in our county. Really phenomenal, huge number, and that is in our past, and I think it's amazing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Kathy, Dan, you guys kind of brought up a piece of history that a lot of people aren't aware of when they come into Marion. This is not a question I sent you, but off the top of my head. Why is it important for the residents of Marion to understand the history of the community that they live in? One of the two of you or anybody else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, since I'm reasonably new to the community, coming from Florida, trying to grasp an understanding of the present and past was extremely important. And just for me, from afar, mostly negative things were what stood out about Marion. It was all the negative stories. Mm-hmm. And so digging in, getting to know individuals, and continuing to, like meeting Jeff just 3-4 weeks ago, and hearing about their stories and their family stories and about all the goodness that happens here, having that balanced understanding, being able to recognize the goodness in our past, but also not glossing over the difficulties, is the only way that I personally believe that our future is a transformed future, that we're able to walk in goodness and righteousness in the future. So for me, it's been extremely important, and I think it's right for many of us to understand the full picture of our history and what we're doing in Marion.
Yeah. Jeff, were you going to add to that?
You pretty much said what I was going to say. I mean, knowing your history, knowing your past is what helps define your future.
That's right.
If we erase our history and we don't speak on it, then we'll continue to be stuck in that same spot or that same space. In order to grow, you have to touch on the things in the past, but we continue to ignore it, and so Marion has continued to be kind of stuck in the same place.
Yeah. Anybody else on that one?
I've noticed that the more that I learn about Marion's history, the more patterns I see in Marion make sense. The more I understand why certain people live in certain neighborhoods, certain people go to certain schools and not other schools, why certain populations of people don't expect to ever graduate from high school or get a job, but some it's the expectation from their whole lives. I notice a lot of tension in that with the students at our school, even speaking about like their understanding of race. Some of my students come from primarily, some white students come from some very rural backgrounds where really terrible beliefs are instilled in them from a young age about anybody who doesn't look like them. But then I have students who literally sit next to them who are black or who are, a student of color in general who they forge friendships with, and you can see them kind of changing their minds, or see some of the white students changing their minds about the value of all human beings. But that would never happen unless they kind of like rubbed shoulders, so to speak. But they would never have done that unless they were forced to go to school together. So learning about the lynching in Marion in 1930, learning about the neighborhood segregation that kind of still exists today, learning about Weaver, Samuel Plato, that stuff really affects 2019 today in Marion. So if you don't know much about the past in Marion, I would encourage you to do some research and learn about those people, those places, those neighborhoods, and see how it can help you understand some of the patterns you might see in the people that live here.
Great. Well, I'm going to quote, if you guys haven't ever heard of Dr. John Perkins or Wayne Gordon, they started CCDA 30 years ago, and it's just a great organization. This book, Making Neighborhoods Whole, is one I would definitely recommend to kind of think through what it means to pursue Christian community development. But in this book, Dr. Perkins is writing, and he says, Jesus was once asked which commandment of the law was the greatest. He responded, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. But he quickly added, and the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and prophets hang on these two commandments. Clearly, Jesus linked loving God with loving neighbor, implying that it is not possible to love God in the way that we should unless we love our neighbor. As you guys are leaders in the community, neighbors yourself, what are some practical ways that we as individuals, think about it more on the individual level, can learn to love our neighbor better? Any of you can start that one off.
By understanding that your neighbor means more than the person living next door to you. By understanding that your neighbor is everybody within your community, and even those that migrate into your community. God is love. He said any man that hates his brother and says he loves me is a lie. So you can't hate your brother and love God. So I can't hate any one of you guys and still say I love God. That's a lie. The Bible says so. And if we really believe in Scripture, then we understand that. So I try to live that to the fullest every day. Any of you guys that truly know me, when you see me out there, I'm with all kind of people, all kind of kids, white, black, Mexican, brown, yellow, purple. I don't care.
Yeah.
I love everybody. And that's showing God's love. The biggest thing you can do for me, in my opinion, is love a person you don't know. I can love my mother. I can love my kids. I can love my wife. That's expected of me. But what happens when I meet a stranger, the person on the corner? Those are my neighbors. So understanding that.
Yeah, it's awesome, man.
I'll piggyback off of his beautiful words. When we moved here 23 years ago, it was very difficult because I didn't feel loved. And I got a revelation that it wasn't that people didn't have time to get to know me, which was my battle, what I was wrestling with, because we'd been in the military and you make friends fast when you're in the military. And I moved here and I couldn't even buy a friend. And my husband suggested that we do a study called Experiencing God by Henry Blackaby. And it changed my life, and it changed how I view community and my responsibility to community. And Mr. Blackaby says that God is at work, and he's asking you to join in what he's doing. And that's how I've always looked at my role in Marion. I wouldn't have chose Marion. It didn't have even a good mall, really. You know, the shopping has never been that great. Thank God for internet shopping now. But God chose me for Marion. And so when that shift and that paradigm shift made me realize that God is inviting me to be a part of whatever he's doing here. And that's an honor. Anytime God asks you to do something, it's an honor. And so I've always looked at it that way. And that would be my first practical suggestion. Another one is acknowledgement. Just the simple posture of when you pass someone, you say hello. And that's something we're not good at in Marion. You want people to know that you see them, and vice versa. You want to be seen. So just, recognizing someone in Walmart and saying hi doesn't really cost anything. Or asking someone how they're doing doesn't really take up a lot of time. But I think that we really need to grow in that area. And I understand, the challenge that what I learned is most of you are related. And so, and that was really good for me to know. By the time you see your mother, your in-laws, your cousin, and your sister, you don't have time for me. And so it's easy to just be in that bubble and not look out. But there are people moving into Marion that will make a difference in Marion, and they don't have family. And so I would encourage you to not just look within your own relationships with those that you have a bloodline with, but look into exposing yourself to those who are outside of that.
One of the things that comes to my mind, even as we consider what it means to love our neighbor, I think my imagination automatically goes to the stories where you're helping or aiding somebody who is less advantaged for one reason or another. But I think in some sense we ought to consider love differently than that. If we're in relationships where our aim is to save or fix or help, I think we're missing out on this call to discipleship where God is inviting us to be transformed by those relationships. Mm-hmm. And not just that we're showing up to be good and to do our service for that person, but rather, in some sense, to put it in the language of Henry Blackaby, if God is already at work there, in what way is God desiring to transform me by my relationship to the other? Another person who maybe at first, again, maybe by the way in which our churches have operated or the habits of our Christian expression in our community is more one of, hey, how can I help? But maybe we ought to consider in some sense In what way is Jesus present and calling us to be transformed, to be discipled in relationship with some of the folks that we often view through the lens of how can I help you?
If I could piggyback off that idea, we throw on some phrases at Kinwell that we need each other, we belong to each other, and I mean that not as like students need each other and staff needs each other, but like I need the students just as much as they might need me to help get them through a class. I need to be around those students. I need to hear their stories. I grow and I'm challenged and I mourn and I rejoice through the relationships that I have with them. I learn about Marion, I learn about myself, I learn about relationships from them. So something practical that everyone in here can do is think internally, what are your perspectives of the people in the community? Do you see yourself as being detached from them and wanting to serve? Or do you see yourself just as needy as the people in the community? Because that's the reality. We need each other. And until we can see that we belong to each other and we need each other, those divisions are still gonna stay alive and thrive and get bigger. So figuring out how to break down some of those walls, even in your own self, can really help. At our school, we are always looking for people who are willing to bring food to the school. A lot of our students eat very poor nutritional quality of food. A lot of times it's like gas station food. Like it's not uncommon for people to come in drinking a Mountain Dew and a pack of powdered sugar donuts for breakfast every day. So, or nothing at all. So we are always looking for people who want to bring in something that's just, a tad bit healthier than that, just to help them have their bodies feel good so they can focus on schoolwork. It's a very easy, practical thing that people can do. Another thing is, I saw Jordan in here somewhere. She's teaching one of our students how to play guitar. And that's fantastic. A lot of our students don't have any kind of creative or physical outlet. Like I grew up being able to play sports or being in a music class at school, and our students don't have that as much, don't have access to it. And so we're always looking for people in the community who have some sort of skill, whatever that might be, who are willing to take an unruly teenager under their wing once a week and teach them something. That goes a huge way in having our student feel seen, feel valued, that their presence matters. And that you might have something you could offer them. They might have something they can offer you as well. You don't know how their stories, their experiences might really impact your life and the way you see the world.
Yeah, that's great. And we're going to take time later to kind of discuss ways that you can get involved with any of these organizations represented. But just kind of staying on that neighbor idea, I've been blessed to have, I think, the best neighbors in Marion. They are a sweet family that come from another country. They're of another faith. But they've shown me so much about what it means to be a neighbor. They've taught me about hospitality. They taught me about being there for the other. And but if I looked at their faith or their color of their skin or even their cultural differences, and I allowed that to be something that kept me away from them, I never would have gained the opportunity to be in relationship with them. So just thinking about that, why do you guys think that fear keeps us separated here in Marion?
So I like being comfortable. I'm an introvert by nature. And so coming into any crowd where I don't know people, I feel more comfortable today because I see faces and know names. But for me then, doing this kind of stuff that we just talked about, going to be a good neighbor into somebody else's neighborhood, into somebody else's church, that's a little tougher for me to do. So that fear naturally keeps me and makes me slow down in going into those places that I'm more uncomfortable. You asked?
I don't remember, but I think, why does fear keep us?
So for me, that fear naturally keeps me among people I know, that look like me, that act like me, that worship like me, that sing the songs I know. All of that stuff is my safe place. So to me, it's very easy to see how fear keeps us homogenous, not loving the full breadth of our neighbors in the city that our friends have talked about up here. So for me, then, I have to reprioritize, clarify in my heart. When Jesus was asked, "Who's your neighbor?" he described somebody that was wholly different, the Samaritan to the Jew, and it was this going to someone very different, not just to the people, my neighbors to the right and left and across the street. So for me, then, it's overcoming that fear and going and, like you were talking about, receiving all the goodness of the culture and the differences in the neighbor that is other for me.
I think it would help us also to reflect a little bit on our theology of safety. We use that language a lot to talk about our choices as it relates to the neighborhoods we choose to live in or the neighborhoods we choose to visit. And even when we first moved here a few years ago, we rented for a little while and then we're looking at homes. And there's streets that people say, "Oh, don't live there because it's not safe." Well, we live in a neighborhood where one block one way and then on the other side of us 1 block away too, there has been issues of some drug trafficking and gun violence and these kinds of things, and yes, I don't feel like we're parents and it's easy to you're not choosing a safe place for your kids or these kind of things, and yet because we know and live and are in a relationship with a lot of our neighbors, there's a lot of security in that, but it is so different to be in a place where you are with others who, Jan, for example, is our neighbor. She's the president of our neighborhood association, and so there's ways in which we together, as neighbors who care about the place we occupy, can continue to work together to make it different. To walk regularly to pick up trash, to fix up our local park, and all of a sudden things start emerging. It's almost as if they're already alive there under the surface. But there is good that emerges if we will give ourselves the chance to work with others, to see a place transformed, and not just always make these decisions strictly about safety and out of our fear. And that's a really tricky line, I recognize, because there are triggers for all of us. And we usually use our privilege to isolate us from these places we say are not safe. But I think we need to dig a little deeper and spend a little more time with our theology of safety.
My lens is a little different. I'm African American, I'm middle class, I'm educated, and I live in this community. So I'm always having to, I feel a responsibility to bring things up that make others feel uncomfortable, because most times I'm the only African American at the table. Which I find disappointing. And so, raising 2 kids here, being Christian, we decided early that we wanted our children to go to Christian school, so they went to Lakeview. And we were experiencing racism, and it was just really going over my head, really. So my fear was rejection. Especially for my babies, my kids, my 2 kids. And how could I raise them in this community and they come out whole and they know that they have a sense of dignity? And we went through a lot, and we continue to. But our faith has kept us focused. We made an agreement when we got married that we wanted to be in a multicultural church wherever we were. And oftentimes, we created the multicultural, you know. So there were challenges there. But, you know, I would tell, as far as my neighbors, I'm a high I on the disc. So, and then my number one 5 strengths is positivity. So that's always something that works in my favor. But I would do things like with my kids. One time we invited an older couple over for dinner, an older white couple, and they got to ask some questions about when was the first time they saw an African American. They were farmers, ask them questions about that. So we brought people into our home so that our kids would be educated on culture. Black culture, of course, we made a point of, they weren't getting that in the schools, so once a week they had to write a report and present it to me and Bruce about about what they're learning about African American culture. I remember one time my daughter did a paper in the 5th grade on Madam C.J. Walker, and they were at Lakeview. And in the paper, it said that Madam C.J. Walker was a millionaire, and the teacher crossed it as being wrong. And it's true. She was, you know. And so to be a good neighbor for us, because we were the one African American family in a predominantly white neighborhood on the north side of Marion, we had to allow ourselves to be vulnerable and bring them in and get to know us. And sometimes it was very hurtful. Mm-hmm. But again, I had to go back to what Henry Blackaby said, that I was asked by God. God invited me to be a part of Marion, and so that's always been my foundation. And so our neighbors, now we've been in the neighborhood 20 years. My neighbors are older, and we pretty much look after them. And now I see the value. There's a value to longevity in a community. That you get to know people over time. And you get to love them and see them go through things. You get to attend their funerals. And I don't know if I would have gotten that anywhere else. And learned that as a neighbor, to love and be loved over a 20-year period by the same people. Yeah. And that's a high value for us.
Yeah, that's great, Kathy. We've got time for one more response. So yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, can I speak on the fear? Yeah. Fear. Most people are scared of what they don't know. I want to use myself for an example on this response. The life that I used to live, if I was to walk in this room being that person, most of you guys would be scared. I would have never been asked to sit up here on this panel. I would have never been asked to be a part of this discussion. I would never be executive director of Boys and Girls Club because of fear. Somebody not wanting to get to know who I really am because of the life that I used to live. But because of, again, I stress it the most, because of 2 ladies from right here at Indiana Wesleyan, Vicki Conrad and Amy Alcott, who showed no fear and was like, nah, that's not who you are. We see something else. We want to be your neighbor. We want to love you. That I was able to become this guy. So same person, 2 different lives. One is accepted. It's shown because I'm sitting right here on this panel. Yeah. But if I was to walk in here in my hoodie and my pants sagging with my hat on, most of you guys would be scared or with fear, wouldn't want to talk to me, wouldn't want to get to know me. Yeah. But I'm the same guy who loves everybody's kid in the community, who gives everything that I have in my pocket to feed anybody that I see hungry, or to clothe anybody that I see without. So that's fear. We're scared to get to know each other. We're scared to build relationships with each other. Yeah. We spoke a lot about the lynching in Weaver. That's where a lot of my family comes from. So my great-grandmother was born right out there on the Weaver settlement. My cousin was one of those involved in the lynching. So yeah, we ignore those things because we're scared to speak on it. We're afraid. That keeps us separated. Those are the things that separates us in Marion. That's why people live over here. That's why we have people that live out. Nobody like me live in North Marion. No, because I'm scared to live out there, and they're scared for me to live out there. Yeah. That's the fear. We don't want to build with each other.
Yeah. Well, guys, we're going to continue this and after a short break, so 5-minute break, get some coffee, grab some donuts. And when we get back, the first question that I'm going to throw at you guys is, how can College Wesleyan Church be a better neighbor to all of Marion? And the question that we're going to look at next, as I stated before the break, is how can College Wesleyan Church, we are a part of this community. We're in South Marion, but we're a part of a greater community here in Marion. And we're called not only to be neighbors to individuals, but neighbors as a church to other individuals. And so, from your perspective, how can College Wesleyan be a better neighbor to all of Marion?
I think, first of all, just acknowledging that that it's difficult. Being a neighbor means so many things, but, having relationships with other people is just hard. And it takes a lot of work. And, Joanna and I were just chatting that she's like, I didn't know any of those things about Marion. And I was like, yeah, a lot of people don't. And I think that, just even those little types of things helps people to have a sense of pride in their community. And one thing I've observed about the community is that there seems to be a real self-esteem issue. People don't know that they deserve better. And so I think part of being a great neighbor in the community is just acknowledging that it's going to be hard and spending that time with people and letting them know that they are valuable as a person. And then in turn, that's transformative. When they start to care, when they start to know that they're valued, they start to take pride in their self, in their job, in their home, and just, the way that that could infect a community in a good way is just exciting to think about.
One thing that all of you here and anyone at the church can do to be better neighbors in Marion is learn about some of the systems in Marion that you I'm guessing probably don't come into contact with a lot. So whether that be learning about the criminal justice system in Marion, learning about different addiction services or counseling services in Marion, other churches in Marion who are also trying to partner with Marion to help bring flourishing here. I have in my school, I've learned a lot more about the criminal justice system in Marion just because a lot of our students are just getting out of a youth facility or are on probation or something like that. And so there's just a huge need for more people to understand what it's like to go through that, what it's like to have a label attached to you from age 12, that you are a bad kid, that you're a danger to the society in this area. Those labels are so hard to shake, and they're so damaging to a kid's identity. A lot of what we try to do at Kinwell is reframe the story that the kids are telling themselves. A lot of them come in saying, I'm a bad kid. We say, no, you're not. You're not a bad kid. You're a wounded kid. Maybe you've had some bad choices. You've probably had a really crappy life in a lot of senses where you haven't had other people in your life give you any different lens to look at yourself to look at your potential through. So if that sounds completely foreign to you, I would encourage you to get to know people or just do some research. Learn what it might be like to, what it's like to be on probation, who's in charge of that, what it's like to be chronically truant. What might it, put yourself in some other people's shoes of what their experiences might be like, because those people live really close to you, and it's a really tough struggle to overcome in the absence of close relationships with other people.
Well, I think I sent this question to you guys. This one, there's probably going to be a lot of different views from you guys. There's probably a lot of different views out there. But I recognize, like any community, Marion has its fair share of challenges. And so in order for us to thrive, what is needed for that to happen, and what must we overcome to make that possible?
We need to talk to each other. We really do. We need to have conversations with those that we normally don't have conversations with. Because the divide, in my opinion, comes from misunderstanding. You know, I'm in a lot of things with Thriving, and the people that I work with, I haven't met one person that didn't have a good heart and have the best intentions about Marion. I really haven't. But when I talk to others who do not know them, they feel left out and not a part of what we're doing. So we've got to figure out how to talk to each other. And secondly, going along with the last question, College Wesleyan has a lot of influence. We have a lot of people in prominent positions in this community, and we need to start sharing them. We need to think, okay, I need a secretary. Now, maybe I should get an African-American secretary, because everyone in my office is white. And there are some with experience, or Hispanic. But begin to look outside of your norm and your comfort zone and take the challenge of making your organizations different. Make them look like Marion.
So I would kind of piggyback off of what both of them said. It's about building relationships. In order to thrive, in order to grow, you put a seed in the ground. In order to watch that seed grow, you have to add some water to it. Marion's real dry right now. We haven't added water to the seed. So we're not watching anything grow. Even to step into that, back to the last question, kind of goes in. College Wesleyan, I see, does a lot. They're involved with a lot of schools. To be honest, Indiana Wesleyan has been probably the biggest supporter of Boys and Girls Club since I've been executive director. And I'm thankful and grateful for that, but it takes more than that. Don't just be a friend that comes to my house. Don't just be a friend that comes to your other buddy's house. Invite us to your home. Invite me into your home. Let me come into your home and fellowship with you. But if you're continuing to come out inside of our schools and not allowing me to come in, then I don't know anything about you. We're not fully getting to know each other. We going only inside the school or only inside of the boys club only allows you to see a little bit. Doesn't allow you to see the real life that some of these people live out here in Marion. Mm-hmm. In order to do that, we have to be fully engaged. You have to add the water. You have to sit and watch. I like to play music for my plants and watch them grow. You know, that's building a relationship. And when I say that, I mean like hanging out, dancing. I'm using those as, you know, me and you going to lunch with each other. You invite me into your home for dinner. Me inviting you into my home for dinner. If you don't know a person who has been on probation, been incarcerated, meet one. If you don't know a person that lives in poverty, meet one. Become friends with people that you wouldn't normally be friends with. So I work with kids. If you see me, I'm always with a group of kids. The one thing that I always try to do is take a kid that's from down here and have them be friends with a kid that's up here. A kid that lives in a big fancy house with a kid that has nothing. So they can see each other's lives, so they can get to know how each other lives. We have to do that as adults. That's the only way we could thrive.
Okay. When I was in college, I visited Thailand, and while I was there, I got sick and ended up in the hospital. And one of the nurses who was attending to me, had some handle of English, so we were able to communicate a little. But then when the missionary showed up, he was attending to other things, and he spoke both languages well. He was looking at the charts and some of the medication that they were giving me, and he started asking me about my symptoms, and I'm like, no, I don't have any of those kinds of things. And ultimately what had happened is this person who thought they spoke English well enough to understand me had come up with a diagnosis of what I was experiencing and was offering me a treatment that wasn't well suited for me. And ultimately it took somebody who understood my symptoms or understood what I was trying to communicate in order to finally get me the medication that I needed. I think in many ways, if we don't diagnose some of the nature of our challenges correctly, we're going to be offering the wrong kinds of treatments. And I think part of the relationship building helps us to understand, like we've got to have the language, we've got to have the experiences that when we don't just show up and think we speak the language and then therefore offer the wrong kind of responses. But we've got to be able to show up and know, be in relationship, have practiced these things long enough that we have the chance to understand collectively what the diagnosis is, and then therefore be able to offer the right response. And I think a piece of that is that we must see things through the lens of systems as well. These, the nature of poverty, the nature of incarceration, the nature of race, all these things are not just about individual interactions and somebody's foolishness or hatred or the things that they said that was uninformed. There are tremendous systems at play here. Let me give one example. And again, it takes a training of our eyes, a learning of this new kind of language to be able to diagnose and see and treat these things correctly. But for example, we often think of people in poverty as it being a series of their set of poor choices that got them to that point. That's just, again, the oversimplification of that experience is often like that. But do we realize that there are systems in place that perpetuate poverty? For example, there's a dynamic called the cliff effect. If a family is on government support and a person gets a promotion, let's say they get a promotion and are going to be earning $200 more a month. Well, some of the government supports that they have, maybe they were getting $800 in help with their kids, for their kids. But once they get that $200 raise, that $800 support for the kids drops all the way off. So their net experience of being promoted, getting a raise, getting a better job is actually a loss of $600 on an already tight budget where they're living on the margins already. Is that on them? No, that's a system. That's on us collectively. And we've got to learn to see through this lens and see these things differently, because a lot of these dynamics have deep-seated systemic issues behind them. And until we see those dynamics and understand what is at play in just the water we're all swimming in, we're not going to be able to diagnose and therefore treat these things in the way that is most effective.
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
When you talk about challenges, and Andrew, thanks for that big overall picture. I agree with the diagnosis. And let me tell you my perspective on what those are. So if it's not clear, first of all, I think most of us up here believe that race and reconciliation is a big obstacle that we need to dig into here, to the point where some of you are like, okay, let's move on to something else. But that could be part of the problem, right? So I think in Marion, we have to deal with the lack of genuine reconciliation That is a huge obstacle that we're facing. Beyond that, in both surveys as well as listening in the community, and probably for y'all just driving around, housing's a huge issue. Our housing is falling apart. We've got too many houses, and we're working on ordinances, but from my perspective, not putting good safety nets for people on fixed incomes. So that whole mix of housing issue is a huge issue. And then also what we've heard is the poverty issue, where underemployment or unemployment, not having good jobs, not enough good jobs, not high enough income is also something we've heard a lot. And then youth development, caring for children to youth, what Jeff talked about a little bit earlier, is getting while they're young and coming alongside and developing up, that we don't have a great experience for youth here. And then last, and this is my perspective, as I look and say, we need an awesome downtown. We need a kickin' downtown, and we need to get off the bypass, support the businesses down there. But for those of you who don't know, we also have a neighborhood in the community called The Village. If you go south on Adams and Washington, you run into a little commercial district called The Village. I look at that and see, man, we have an amazing downtown and a midtown. And as Joanna talked earlier, it happens to be in the center of the non-white community. And so for us to have a kicking Marion, I think we need to have a strong downtown, a strong village that includes all ethnicities in the community. But that strip has a lot of historic buildings and houses on that strip down Washington and Adams. And so as I look like long-term vision, I think we need to invest city-wise from the downtown all the way to the village, that people would want to be in the village, will want to be in the downtown, won't forget that we have those things and those businesses there, but instead be drawn to those places for the life and vitality that are there. So those, I think, are some of the challenges that I see big picture.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're running low on time, but a couple more questions. There's this idea, we hear it a lot. How can we serve Marion? We talk about that a lot here at the church. We want to be a church that serves Marion. But in that, sometimes that leads to a term that's called toxic charity. And when we do that, we're just simply offering something, perpetuating the problem oftentimes. But in that same time, we never take time to look at how Marion can point out things within us that we need to change. And so the question to you guys is how can we start making the shift from seeing Marion as a place to be served rather than to a place that we can neighbor well in? Does that make sense? How do we make that shift from being someone who is a neighbor instead of someone who simply serves? Because there's a big difference in that.
I think sort of a way that I look at it is not treating Marion and Grant County like it's a mission trip. Not that, I'm here and I'm able to help these people for this amount of time while I'm here, and looking at it from the outside. I think just taking a perspective of that, I live here and I'm in the middle of this, and I'm part of this too. And I'm not here to fix it, whatever that means, because I think by this time, everything that we've discussed, we all know that it's not going to be fixed in a week. So just recognizing that it's going to take a lot of time, and like I said before, it's going to be difficult, and that I live here and I'm part of it too, and it's not just a mission trip that I'm here to fix while I'm here.
So I would say, like I tell people who donate to the club, the Boys and Girls Club of Grant County appreciates and needs every donation that it gets. But at the same time, I don't want you to just donate. I don't want our kids to be just a charity case. I want you to come in and I want you to learn about the Boys and Girls Club, learn about the programs that we have. Meet me, meet our kids. When we continue to just give and give and give, that doesn't help, doesn't empower our community. if I have a person who is of poverty and addicted to drugs, and I keep feeding them money because I think it's helping. Oh, he's poor. I want to help. It's not helping. We see that with the food stamp thing. You know, people apply for the food stamps, but then they turn around and sell the food stamps. But then we give them more food stamps next month, then they sell the food stamps. We're not helping. We're enabling bad behavior. And they're just going to keep repeating that cycle. So instead of just giving, again, we have to build relationships with each other. In order to change Marion, it can't be a charity case. It has to be a part of building a relationship.
We're having more conversations at Kinwell about how trauma affects the brain, especially of developing children. Many of you might have heard of something called ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. The more adverse childhood experiences that someone undergoes, the more trauma they struggle with for potentially the rest of their life. There are, thankfully, a lot of things that can be done to help heal and move forward from these adverse experiences, but one of the primary ways that children can heal is through building trusted relationships with adults, rebuilding some of those bridges that have been burned. Some of my students grew up in really abusive, frightening, unstable homes where the adults in their life were not trustworthy. They come to our school, which tells you something about their educational experience so far, or lack thereof. And it can take a while before they will let me in and they will share their story with me. But I hope that over time, through relationship, they will see not all adults are scary, not all adults are harmful, not all adults are out to use them for their own gain, whatever that may have been. One thing that you can do, I think, is research more about trauma and see the potential that building relationships can build and actually bringing change and healing, as opposed to what you're saying, just throwing money at a problem. We need relationships. All of us need relationships to heal from hard things we've been through in our life. The absence of people and isolation and loneliness is only going to make anything worse, whatever the trauma may have been.
And I'll keep this brief. I would encourage you to remember that it affects you. It really does. I mean, poverty in our community affects you as well. And so I think that's why we're in this predicament that we're in now.
One of a quote that I remember from Lilla Watson is, if you've come to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you see your liberation as bound up with mine, then we can work together. And I think oftentimes, we approach with a saving, fixing, helping kind of mindset, but in many ways our salvation can be worked out in relationship with people on the margins. I think that I am regularly being saved, being liberated from my selfishness. I'm being saved and liberated from my ingratitude. I'm being saved and liberated from my fragility. I've been saved and liberated from my lack of compassion and generosity at times. So our engagement with people on the margins is critical for our own liberation, for our own salvation. And until we see it through that lens, then oftentimes we're just showing up with the wrong kinds of, in the wrong kind of way.
Yeah, one tangible for how I have sought to be a neighbor and not be in it for the helping. And I think this goes back to us at College Wesleyan. We're very blessed. We have 2 services on Sunday morning. So I go with my family to the first service at 9:30, which ends in time for my daughter to go over to youth. And when she goes over to youth, I head to another church. So the last 3.5 months, I've been attending Calvary Missionary Baptist, which is just on the south side of the village there. Pastor Al Green, he's a great pastor. But I came as a tender I knew Al from the NAACP already, but I really didn't know the church. But I came in just worshiping week after week, hanging out with, spending time together. It was a great experience for me as I visited other historically African American churches, but primarily on a weekly basis at Calvary, where I'm just another part of the church, just there living with, getting to know. And most of the people who attend there aren't my neighbors next door in my neighborhood, my house, but they're my neighbors at church on Sunday. And so I think we're particularly blessed here, where we can remain fully immersed at College Wesleyan while also immersing ourselves to break some of those boundaries, get to know neighbors outside of our quote-unquote neighborhood, and actually start building those relationships on common ground, where then, just a few weeks ago, one of the guys in the church asked me to take him to the grocery store and then to the house afterwards. It's because I was his buddy, not because I was there to help anybody, right? And so a different place where, of course, let's go, Steve, and then we ride from there. So one tangible of how we can be a neighbor outside of our neighborhood.
Yeah. Well, we have time for one last question, and this is a kind of a question for all of you. So what is your hope, your desire for Marion in 5, 10, 20 years from now? Anybody can start it off. Or Dan can, because he's holding the microphone.
So I think we have the foundation of some amazing structures. If you're not familiar with Thriving Families, Thriving Grant County, what Kathy has been initiating, it's a really great structure to start building. We have a lot of high-octane leaders because of the university, the churches, Taylor. So my hope is, let me say at the same time, I talk to many of those high-level leaders, and we don't know yet how to really network, collaborate, and see all of Marion thrive. So my 5, 10, 15 years down the road vision is seeing some of the structures and the stuff in circles and Kenwood. I mean, the leaders that are next to me and others, some of you out in the community, that the structures that we're building now and the leaders, we would find a way to see a coalescing, a coming together, to see the community operating in collaboration and focus and accomplishing that. That would be my hope or vision for that we would see that kind of coalition coming together.
One of the things this question even makes me think of is my longing for the kingdom of God to be present here on earth as it is in heaven. There's ways in which the kingdom of God is alive and well, and we get to participate in that. And it sparks in us something that brings about life. And yet, there's so many ways in which it's not yet here too. And so the question in my mind really parallels in what ways do I long for the kingdom of God to be present here? And I think one of them is just that we would find, Jesus' prayer for us was that we would be one. And I think part of being one is recognizing the social divisions between us and making every intention and effort to overcome those, to build relationship with people whose life experience is not at all like ours, to overcome our fears, to address some of the ways in which we call fears pursuing safety, to do all these things in an effort to see the kingdom of God here, because we are reconciled. We are one. We are finding ways to love and live together with one another that is really contrary to the typical pattern of our community and our world.
Grant County is number one in childhood poverty. And my hope is one day in the Chronicle Tribune, above the fold, we are going to get an award for being number one in the most robust county in the state. In my work, I always ask, what is something that you want for our community that you can't do alone? And so my hope is that we'll continue to find ways to work collectively, that we'll relinquish power and credit so that we can get the job done. So children that are that Jeff is with right now, they won't be up here singing the same tune that we are, because we've done so well. We've done the work to make our community better. And that's my hope, is that we're going to have something to celebrate in 5 years of how we've come through this difficult time, and we're a benchmark for the state of Indiana of how to do it.
A couple practical dreams that I know Kinwell talks about a lot. One is that many of our board members who are business owners in the community talk about the need or they're always hiring. They're always looking for people to work for them, which is great. That's not often a story you hear in Marion. The problem is a lot of my students who really want a job don't know how to keep a job. One young man in particular, he is a young father. He's a 1-year-old son. He is basically the provider for his son and his girlfriend, and he just doesn't have anyone in his life who has ever taught him some basic job skills like showing up on time, that you can only miss a certain number of days before you're let go, just basic things like that. And it's not because he's not smart. He's very bright. I learned that stuff from my parents growing up. Like, it was just kind of a common conversation, and he hasn't had anyone like that. And so one hope I would have for the community is that there would be people out there who would not only offer to hire someone like some of my students, but would maybe take them under their wing and teach them some of those extra things on top of that, of what it can look like to flourish in a job, to persevere in a job when there's things that come up in the job you don't like or that are difficult. 2 other dreams we have at Kinwell. One is for something like, we're calling it a Kinwell house, so to speak. Many of our students are functionally homeless. They kind of couch surf for whatever reason, and they don't have a very stable environment to live in. We would love to have some sort of building in Marion that is safe, that's clean, that would have house parents in it, and that would be a safe place for teenagers, like 15, 16-year-olds who are on their own, to have a safe place to live, teach them some of those adulthood skills, and then launch them into a healthy adulthood. And the other thing we dream of is having a gym. A lot of our kids don't have a place to play basketball or work out, especially over the winter. Obviously, there's some great parks in Marion where they can play outdoors when it's nice, but they just would love a place like that just to play. And really, that's what it comes down to. There's so much joy and growth that comes from being able to play in safety at a place where they're welcome. So that's something else that we dream of. Thanks.
Those are all great dreams. I'm a very to-the-point person, and I can actually answer this because I got asked this earlier this week, what my hope is for Grant County. And, I simply put that my hope is a community where people care, but also feel cared for.
So I started off when you asked what should people know about Marion? I said giants fight, never die. Well, when Marion plays together, when those giants are on the court or on the football field, we come together. We're a family. Everybody loves everybody. We're in those stands. We're cheering together. So I don't know if you guys know Dr. Moore, Dr. David Moore, but he said something to me one time, and it's kind of stuck with me. So when I think about Marion, I think about that love that we have when we watching our kids on the basketball court or when we're watching them on the football field and we're yelling, "Giants fight, never die," and Brad Lindsay is rooting up the crowd. That's what I vision for Marion. I vision Marion coming together so great, so big, that when they look at Marion, they say, God did that. Nobody else could have had a hand on that but God. God did that. That's what I see for Marion.
Awesome. Well, guys, I want to encourage you. I mean, the common theme that we're hearing from the panelists, and thank you guys for being with us and sharing with us this morning. But what we keep hearing is there's need for relationships. There's need for us to cross into other cultures and build solid relationships that not us going in to fix, but allowing this opportunity for us to grow together in this relationship. And as they were talking, it reminded me of a passage. Many of you familiar with it. But I want to read an excerpt from Jeremiah 29, and it says this. It says, "This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all of those carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and settle down, plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number, do not decrease, and seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into. Pray to the Lord, because if it prospers, you too will prosper." And I read that recognizing that as a church, if we're going to prosper, our city has to prosper. If we as individuals are going to prosper, every individual has to prosper.